A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the three key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime: Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier.
Is there any indication from U.S. intelligence that Iran was able to move any material, including
just the opposite. We think we hit them so hard and so fast they didn't get to move. And if you knew about that material, it's very hard and very dangerous to move.
Are you interested in restarting negotiations with Iran? And if so, have they reciprocated?
So our people, Marco could answer, but our people are not, I'm not. The way I look at it, they fought, the war's done, and, I could get a statement that they're not going to go nuclear. We're probably going to ask for that, but they're not going to be doing it. But they're not going to be doing it anyway. They've had it.
You just said you believe the conflict between Israel and Iran is over. What makes you so confident it is? And what do you do if it isn't?
Because I dealt with both, and they're both tired, exhausted. They fought very, very hard and very viciously, very violently. And they were both satisfied to go home and get out. And can it start again? I guess someday it can. It could maybe start soon.
Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Barca from Mexico City with co-host, teacher and socialist Andy Lipson. All the way from Oakland, California. I can see you're back. And Michael Hoffman, socialist and community college math professor. We're online at whatslftpodcast.com. You can find that link to our site in the episode notes. You can also find my personal social media handle as at Don Eduardo Abarca. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, and share your favorite episode wherever you found this episode. We have merch as well. If you would like a shirt, contact us through our site at what'sleftpodcast.com. All right, thank you. Thank you for keeping always the intros in and the housekeeping. Let's get this show started, Andy. There's a lot that's happened over the weekend.
Yeah. So our last episode was titled U.S. versus Iran, and it said something like, and it talked about U.S. with Israel versus Iran, part one. And the theme of that conversation, because at that point, Israel, we had just discussed things, and at that point, officially, Israel was the only one that was offensively attacking Iran. But I think the content conversation we all had here was like, this is all United States, and that United States is not Israelis' puppet. Israel is United States' puppet and proxy. And we had also talked about the fact that things were moving towards, looked to be moving towards an offensive, the U.S. getting directly involved in actually offensive action on Iran. And at that time, Michael, I remember you mentioned this, which I hadn't heard about at the time. You had mentioned, well, he said 2 weeks. And, and I said, okay, it could be in a 2-week window, but it really felt like it was going to happen to me sooner. And I remember hearing Cy Hirsch had written an article that was like, it's going to happen this weekend. And Cy Hirsch was right. It ended up happening the Saturday. So it happened pretty quickly with the U.S. Basically hitting, let me do a share so I can do it here. Yeah. The U.S. hitting 3 so-called nuclear development facilities where nuclear uranium was being enriched, where there are centrifuges and things like that. One in Isfahan, one in Natanz, and the famous one is Fordow, which is the one where that was the most underground one, maybe the implication was that's where the most enriched uranium was. Maybe that's the best place to. That was maybe the implication. I mean, as you can see from this video thing, this little image, the attack involved 3 B-2 stealth bombers using these state-of-the-art bunker busters, which supposedly go really far down deep into cement, and then explode once they've gone down deep, like hundreds of feet. They're able to do that. And then they also, and I didn't know this at the time, like I guess they also did some Tomahawk missile shots. And the event, it just happened, and they flew out, did their destruction, came back. Almost no event other than that like happened. Like there weren't any B-2 bombers shot down. I don't even know if there was an attempt to do that. And immediately the United States claimed we've destroyed we've destroyed their nuclear development facilities. This was a complete success. I mean, we kind of out over the top stuff from both Hegseth and Trump about like this was the most miraculous strike of all time, and also threats at the time of like, and if Iran tries to strike us back in any way, we've already hit them hard now, then they're really going to be in trouble. And of course, people were very worried about this. I mean, what the United States just done, because again, World War III. Honestly, I think it's not a good thing. I mean, this is a really bad thing the United States did this. But for me, I didn't trip about World War III because I already think we're in World War III, and I expect this stuff to kind of uncoil like this. Like I expect the United States to get more involved. And in fact, the thing that Michael had cited from the Marathon Initiative revisiting strategic sequencing is I did see this, what was taking place as the institution of offensive sequencing and basically trying to take on, as they know they're going to be fighting China and Russia in one way, shape, or form, and even Iran, to take on Iran now. And so I was sort of like, yeah, this makes sense what they're doing. I mean, I don't agree with it. It just makes sense because they're striking their phalanx of enemies at their weakest link. And I expected there to be an escalatory ladder from this point. And that's not, and I think because Michael, I asked you if you were going to be coming this episode, and you said, yes, I'll make it. And you had said like, yeah, I said, it'd be good really to talk about this. And you said, yeah, it's weird. And I'm like, it is weird, because there's a lot of things to discuss about what has happened, even since what I've told you about, like the fact that I guess I don't want to say, maybe I'll just say all the things I'm thinking about, and then you guys can decide where you want to come in. But from my vantage point, the U.S. was not successful at destroying the nuclear, the uranium stuff, or even the centrifuges, or at least they don't have evidence of it. And I think there's reason to believe it was not at all successful. Like there was stuff of Iran pulling that stuff out of there, pulling the uranium out, and then and now they say they don't even know where this 400 kilograms of uranium is. That's what the IAEA says. The group that is used to monitor has been used to monitor the nuclear stuff of Iran.
IAEA.
Yeah, but I don't know what they stand for. I can't remember. I know A is atomic, and so they can't even find the stuff anymore because they had to leave, and it was clear that all those 3 places were emptied out. Trucks had been coming in there and pulling things out of there, probably uranium, probably maybe even centrifuge equipment. Ted Postel, and a person who works in MIT and has experience with missile strikes and these sorts of things, even said that like there's all sorts of evidence that yes, they might have tried to shoot their bunker buster bombs down those tubes to like make the place collapse on itself, but since the explosion came outward, it doesn't seem like because they actually knew that the things were capped on both ends, like Iran had capped them at both ends. They might not have even gone through the second cap. So there's all sorts of different things I'm hearing that suggest that the United States was not successful. But what's weird to me, because I don't, the U.S. is doing this not because of nuclear weapons. They're doing this because of regime change and because they're trying to put China and Russia on their back foot. and China in particular, in my opinion, and do so to something decisively so they can pivot towards China. Well, the way that the United States is taking this up right now, which is like, okay, we struck you, and we're saying we eliminated your nuclear stuff. You struck at us, and it was lame. But we're not going to be that mad at you. In fact, we're now going to say, so let's just call it off, and we're going to do this ceasefire thing. And Israel's not going to strike you. You're not going to strike Israel. In fact, Trump's going to claim he's a peace president. That's an absurd thing, but whatever. And Trump's even saying, you know what, China, if you want to get oil from Iran, you go do that. We're not even going to talk to Iran about their nuclear stuff. Why just talk about it? Because it's already been destroyed, which they know it hasn't. But it's like, again, I go back to Brian Berletic's thing about like how the nuclear boogeyman is such a useful tool for attacking Iran. It's almost like they're taking that tool out of the tool chest, so they can't use that pretext to attack Iran. And I'm also struck that, wait a second, you're not making any progress on the Russian front in Ukraine. You're actually inviting China to come back in and get oil from them. And I have one reason for maybe thinking that there's some trickery there. And then you're really de-escalating this war between Israel and Iran, and creating one of your major pretexts for doing this and kind of taking that off the table. In all honesty, I'm a little confused. It doesn't fit how I saw this going, which I expected this thing to kind of escalate more, and that the United States was going to do this as part of what we had said before, Michael, the offensive strategy of taking on Iran and trying to knock that one out. There's some reasons I could say they're doing that. Like, I do believe Israel was struggling with the attacks that Iran was making on it, and the fact that its interceptors were running out of interceptors, and that they felt like they were going to be taking more hits from Iran. And so there are some people who are saying like Israel is needing a pause, and the United States in doing this has given them the pretext and excuse for making that pause. And again, all ceasefires are not peaceful moves. They're just the parties preparing to reload so they can go after each other again. And I do know they're going to go after each other again. But in my opinion, I see the U.S. taking a lot of pieces off the table that have been, not maybe a lot, but many pieces off the table that give them the pretext for going in whenever they want, particularly saying, you know what, we think we've solved this because we've destroyed their nuclear capacity, which I don't believe they have it in any way. So I'll just say that it's a little confusing. I want to talk about that.
No, I'm curious, Andy. You're tracking from your earlier statement on the last episode about you thought this would escalate, but most people would say that it is escalating, and that we are entering into a conflict that is, at least that's what I'm understanding in the mainstream news. But you are seeming to think that we're not. That this was a different way than how you envisioned it.
Yeah, I mean, it's an escalation. Just with the U.S. entering offensively is an escalation, and a lot of people were calling that a sort of signal of World War III. For me, I've already made peace with the fact that we're in World War III, so that signal didn't mean much to me. I expected this to be the beginning of an escalatory ladder, not just a few rungs up the escalatory ladder and then rungs backwards. And in fact, the rungs that they're walking backwards, in my opinion, maybe Michael, I don't know if you agree or not, seem to make it harder to get that, to ratchet it up again. And now I believe the U.S. is complicating its situation. It didn't take out Iran. It's not making things more complicated for Russia. China is now being invited to get oil from Iran. And now China and Russia are now meeting with Iran, actually, at the Shanghai Cooperative Organization, openly, basically talking about how can we help defend you? Like, the U.S. is giving its enemies all sorts of times to rebuild. And I'm wondering, what are you doing? This is not a good, to me. I thought they were doing strategic sequencing. This is a very confusing way to operate it. And I'm not sure if you see the same thing, Michael, because it's a little confusing to see what they're doing. And it makes me question the strategic sequencing thing, or maybe these people, the United States, is just really bad at doing it. Or or again, this is not Trump 5D chess, but is there a 5D move that is being made by the U.S. ruling class that I'm not seeing? Because I feel like now by making this step and not using it to escalate, now they've made their work harder to take on. To take on Iran, Russia, and China, and made it more likely that they're going to face all their enemies together at the same time.
Yeah, that may be true. I don't really know, other than I'll just talk about the things I noticed, which is during the press conference that the Pentagon official held with Pete Hegseth, the first one.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to show this picture. It was very much like,
let you share. Hold on.
It was very much all about the U.S. essentially boasting about its capability. So Operation Midnight Hammer, right? They flew all the way from the U.S., were refueled like 12 times, I think they said.
Mm.
And then this, they called it the strike package, hit these first two, and then they launched Tomahawk missiles. And he emphasized over and over again that they had maintained the element of surprise. So, and even the last thing, the Tomahawk missiles coming in, he also said there was no anti-aircraft that was fired. And then just today, they had another press conference where then he basically shows like they're trying to sell people on how powerful the MOPS were, right? So first of all, what is, it's like, we can do this. We can fly planes all the way from our homeland to hit you, okay? But then they're trying to now say that there was a question of, did Iran know? Could Iran have moved their nuclear material? And the thing that was like obvious to me was like, of course, like they were telegraphing.
Yeah.
So basically, here's the timeline. June 13th, Iran strikes Israel, and they cite an IAEA report from like May as basically the pretext. And then that begins like the Iranian back and forth. And then the discussion is all about, and this is like the absurd thing where Israel attacks Iran, and then suddenly everyone's talking about Iran's nuclear program. Like just on the face of it, like, why is that relevant? Israel just bombed Iran. Iran didn't do anything, So that was an interesting part of the narrative, but in a way it was like telegraphing to Iran that those were the targets, right? I mean, so then 9 days later, the U.S. does its strike. After there's a lot of public discussion about whether or not the U.S. should or not, right? So obviously, Iran could have easily moved a bunch of important stuff out of the way. What they revealed today.
There's pictures of trucks going to those places.
Right.
Fordo, and that's number one. And the other thing was, and this is one of the reasons that this Ted Postal was saying, is like that dude who was next to Hegseth, who was he was one of the chief operators of that whole mission, which had been planned for years. This mission had been planned for years. Basically admitted that the bunker busters were going into these shafts and had to go through these caps. And he said the only way you would put those caps in is if you already knew your thing was going to be under attack. Those caps aren't normally there. So that means the United States knew that Iran knew and had already left town with the stuff. So if the U.S. had already planned to get their bunker buster through these caps, then they already know that they're attacking a facility in which their enemy has sealed the doors. Everyone's gone. We're just shutting this thing up. We're sealing it as much as we possibly can. And so it's a strange theater. That's what I'm saying. But go ahead.
Yeah. And I want to get to like what they were saying today was they were denying that the trucks were taking things out. The trucks were there putting these cement caps on, Andy, and nothing was moved. Okay. That's what they're saying, which to me is like they had 9 days I mean, at least 9 days to be like, uh-oh, they're coming after us. We're obviously done with negotiations now.
Can I say a second thing? Because
Yeah.
Trump had said, "Oh, they didn't remove that uranium. Uranium is really hard to move." Ted Postal said that's a complete lie. You can move. I mean, look, you got to know what you're doing, but it's very easy to get trucks, put the stuff in. It's a sealed gasket stuff to take it and put it somewhere else. So no, not hard to move.
Yeah. And I want to also now bring up the other stuff that I was looking at, which was I started reading, and I really gotta get through, and we should do this. You know, I think more people should read this stuff. This is the strategy paper from the Brookings Institution, which path to Persia.
Yeah.
And there's a very interesting statement about exactly this scenario from 2009. So this is from, and you can see from the URL, the Brookings Institution, Iran strategy, that is, which path to Persia. And it says here, as the conclusion discusses, because they're going through different options, and that in 2009 they're gathering all this information to try and problem solve about the problem of Iran, and says as the conclusion discusses, an air campaign against Iran's nuclear sites, would likely have to be coupled with a containment strategy before, during, and especially after the strikes. Containment would be necessary to hinder Iran from reconstituting its nuclear program, prevent it from retaliating against the United States and its allies, and to deal with Iran's support for violent extremist groups and other anti-status quo activities. Moreover, the United States would have to do so in a situation where many of the other options, particularly diplomatic ones, will likely be impossible because of the political fallout from the strikes. So basically the situation has gotten even worse for the US for this kind of strategy since this was written, because like you're saying, I don't think it's possible for them to actually contain Iran now. It may have been more possible back in 2009. I don't understand exactly what that entails, except that when they're like, if you just think about what just happened, obviously the incentive is now for the Iran to, as soon as possible, develop a nuclear weapon. And lots of people are noticing this in from the left and the right, saying like, well, now obviously, what is Iran going to do? They're obviously going to create a nuclear weapon. And the thing that would be required to prevent that would be to like actually prevent them from getting any more technology, to prevent anyone from trading, any of the materials. It would also be, and that just seems very difficult for them to do that now because of the relationship that's been established with Russia and China since 2009. So it seems like Iran's definitely gonna have a bomb soon. Like, I mean, I think that if you have the knowledge, right, and they have technical knowledge, and you destroy the building, well, you can build a new thing in a few months. And if you've already refined it up to 60%, then it's just a few more cycles to get it up to bomb level. Now, the other thing that occurred, though, is that the US and Israel have now established their reach, right? So one of the things that has happened, one of the things that they did gain was essentially they now have a lot more information about where and how to strike at regime infrastructure. So I think that this signals that they're actually very serious about the regime change strategy. And also in that Path to Persia paper, one of the things they talk about is in finding an internal proxy to fight the regime, right? And there's evidence. I mean, from what I know about the Persians in the United States and the divides within Iran, that it's very likely that they could have actually made a big step forward in advancing some relationships on the ground in Iran with potential proxies. So I see that Iran's going to get a bomb, but does that mean that there won't be an internal split, so that because it looked to me like this was the beginning of a process of cracking it up. It's not. I didn't think that that they really thought they were going to finish anything.
Mm.
Like, it doesn't seem realistic to me that they really would think they would actually finish anything. Because their most successful regime change stuff has been protracted and really ugly, and looks more like using proxies on the inside. And now also, I mean, Israel's just bombing apartment complexes. So what's difficult for me to know is what are the actual cracks internally. Some analysts, or one thing I read, was that the people who were assassinated will probably be replaced with even more hardline nationalists, right? But there's still a lot of people who hate the regime in Iran. Yeah, so a lot of questions. I don't know.
I guess the news that Trump's pushing back on the leaked report findings that U.S. bombs failed to destroy Iran's nuclear program are true. Then I guess that's maybe what we're seeing here, because I had thought maybe that was something to distract us, but you're saying that there might be, actually both of you I think might be saying that there actually might be some truth to it, and therefore all this confusion on what's really happening. Because if there are trucks leaving and I forgot what you said, these caps on these areas, and it's just setting back Iran's nuclear program maybe by a few months, or taking their nuclear equipment somewhere else. And then we're starting to see that in response to this leak, the White House has announced plans to limit sharing classified information with Congress. Then there might be something happening there. And why would they allow it? Or why would, if there was some inside information that the Iranians had to leave before, why is that? Yeah, these are the questions I'm posing myself. I thought that wasn't valid, and now that I'm hearing this discussion, there might be something else at play here.
Can you say again what you thought might have not been? You were thinking that maybe the people questioning. So U.S. came out and said we did the most beautiful attack of all time. It was complete success. You were initially wondering if that the people who are questioning that assessment, you were like, maybe, no, the U.S. probably did what it. Is that what you're saying? You were wondering about the validity of that?
I had initially thought, like most people, that there was a successful mission that happened, and that this was going to escalate.
Right.
To be honest.
Yeah.
Then I had heard in the news, as I was hearing up until today, that that it didn't do any significant damage. There was no severe impact, and these Iran might actually have been notified.
Right.
And then this is all in congruence with the White House also announcing plans to limit classified information with Congress, keeping it more secret. So I guess that's what I'm not sure. Also, the other thing too is Tulsi Gabbard had insisted in the beginning that they didn't have a nuclear arms program, and then suddenly she's coming out and saying, the strike severely damaged Iran's nuclear program. So I'm confused.
Well, Tulsi Gabbard is just a fraud. So that
Right.
right.
First,
Now
she's saying there is nothing happening, and then she's like she's coming out and she's covering it up. It severely damaged Iran's nuclear program.
Right. And there's a word for people like her, like the sycophant, which is basically kissing up to power. And I did not think she was like that kind of person, but she is. And so I think she just exposed herself as like no one, as basically just part of the apparatus up there, and
right alongside CIA Director John Radcliffe.
Right, exactly, or even RFK Jr. So people that people thought had like some integrity,
right?
They don't have any integrity. They're for the highest bidder.
I want to shift to
Fake
like
news.
what politically did we learn? Like what are the political things that we learned as a result of it?
Well, but I think we don't know. Like I'm going to say for me, it is. I had a way of looking at this, and Eduardo is citing it because, and like you, Michael, were saying, no, I didn't expect it to escalate quickly because look at how long most regime change things have taken. But Michael, time is not on the U.S. side right now. They don't have 7 years to take a regime down like they 7 to 10 years to take one of those. Like they're facing, in my opinion, the problems are only getting worse for them. I believe, in my estimation of the U.S. being able to maintain its global hegemony means it has to act now, which is why they were getting Israel in the game, not just around Iran, but around Hezbollah and around Syria and around Gaza. Like they cannot wait. Like, so they don't have time for another 8 years. We're going to grind it out, sanction them this time, and da da da. And I don't think they have the time for that, particularly when things are moving forward for Russia and China economically in terms of its imperial ambitions. U.S. China is building its Belt and Road Initiative, and it's growing, and its allies are building up to it. And India is competitive, but India is showing up to the SCO, to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and talking about what are we going to do to help Iran. So, like, I get it that India and China supports Pakistan with the stuff to shoot down Indian stuff, but they're in the game there with the BRICS. BRICS is not just a monolith against the West. That's a lie, but China and Russia feel like they have forward momentum, and the United States is trying to stop it. And so I don't feel like they have time. And that's why it's like, let me give you another way that I've heard people talk about, which I don't agree with at all, but the events themselves are unfolding in such a way that some of the people who are supporters of Trump are actually saying Trump might have been secretly trying to fuck up the neocons because now they're not able to attack Iran. He's taking that off the table. He's saying that, oh, look, this thing was so successful. He's saying, and they're even saying that Trump knows it wasn't successful. The U.S. and furthermore, and Ted Postal would say this. I mean, he's not saying that Trump is playing 5D chess, but Ted Postal is saying before this mission even started, they knew they could not accomplish what they were thinking they could accomplish. So when they do the mission, even before the B-2 bombers left the United States, they knew this was not going to accomplish the things that they told us they were going to accomplish. So if they know in words that they can't accomplish it, and in fact, if there's now evidence that it didn't accomplish it, and now what the U.S. is doing is walking back, even saying we no longer consider Iran a nuclear threat because we've destroyed their nuclear program. So we're not even going to talk about that. And I'll be curious because Iran is now saying we're not dealing with the IAEA, well, it's International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA. Okay, I got it now. So we're not even going to deal with them. And we're going to see in the coming week or two how that plays out because it is clear to me, and it's been clear for a long time, that you should know it from Iraq, that the IAEA is an imperialist tool. So, and Iran knows that, Russia knows that, China knows that. They're not finding that out now. So now they're getting a pretext in which to push them out and say, we're not going to work with you. Now, so it's like I feel like the tools that the U.S. had to allow them to grab their opponent by the throat, they're taking those tools out of their hand by claiming that they're going to try to normalize things with Iran and go back to negotiations. And, Now I can still say that I do believe that the time that, Michael, that you were talking about, the time that it took the U.S. to get involved was in part they needed to see Israel was going to basically level the playing field or eliminate the air region so that the U.S. could know that they could be successful. But at the same time, I really could see that this might be Iran and even Iran and the United States playing a bit of theater. Iran knew they were coming. We're not even going to put them on our air defense. To like nothing was shot at anything. We're not going to defend ourselves whatsoever. You can come in, come out. We're going to shoot at you, and we're going to tell you that we're shooting at you, and we're going to tell you where we're shooting at you so you can clear out. You're going to, far from the bluster that you said you were going to bring hell on earth if we attacked one of your bases, you're not going to do that. And in fact, you're going to then compliment us for being a little bit restrained and working with us. And now you're going to tell us, hey, if you want to sell China, if you want to buy oil from Iran, you can do that. To me, that's very confusing. If you're trying to take on China, if you're trying to extricate yourself from Russia, like you've now weakened yourself and you weaken that hand. So I don't believe Trump is playing 5D chess, but I kind of get how people are able to say that now. It's frustrating to me, but I don't believe that. I believe that the U.S., there's something else going on here that, I'll be honest, I can't explain given what I thought was going on a week ago. That's what I'm saying.
I feel like, this is in the realm of speculation because we're trying to predict what's going to happen next, and we've been, we felt confident about the decisions that were being made because they aligned with essentially policy documents that laid out actually what it is if you have a model, you take all this past data, things that have happened, and if you can find a thing that connects all those events from the past, then you have much more confidence in it in projecting the future. The problem is that the tools we have are actually very limited. The publicly posted policy documents are just the big intellectual working out of the broad strategies, right? So the things that we have access to are not the detailed day-to-day planning, there's a lot of different things the U.S. and particularly U.S. administration would be responding to, including like domestic politics, right? So there's, I think it's basically difficult to speculate. But another thing that is also clear is that sometimes they mess up. And it's even in that Path to Persia document, there's this whole section about how George Bush blew it. He blew it by basically while starting diplomatic relations, also just talking openly about regime change. Like when they were talking about, oh, we're going to do, first Iraq and then Syria and then, and then Iran, right? The axis of evil, right? So, looking back, they do look at specific administration decisions and say, wow, they really screwed up, right? So it's really difficult for us to say for sure if, to what extent this did not go the way they wanted. It's just difficult to know, right? But in terms of and I see what you're saying also about like the amount of walking back that they're doing. And the fact is that even if they did make a mistake, we also know that they have more cards to play. They're running out of them, right? But they still are the top military power in the world. We also we got insights into domestic politics, which is that the liberals immediately jumped on board with the concept that Iran is a threat to the United States. So we're still in a context where they've, both wings of the ruling party are together on the fact that Iran is a threat to the United States, right? So that part of our model hasn't changed. They're both committed to selling the U.S. public this lie and, making Iran look like a threat. We also saw how some of these libertarian heroes like immediately caved, like Tulsi Gabbard, right? Like Tulsi Gabbard was like reporting, no, Iran doesn't actually intend to have nuclear weapons, and then was basically told to repeat what Trump said, which there's no, there's like no evidence for. I mean, it's to me, it smacks of they've been getting away with these lies for so long that they just have no. They're just like not. They there's not going to be they know there's not going to be consequences for just making stuff up, and there won't be. There's not really. I
Can
know
I ask
that.
you a question though, Michael? So I understand and I agree with you that these are policy papers and you can find them online. So let's be clear. There's a limit to what
Right.
I mean, the real stuff is not to be found anywhere. It's somewhere else. But this is the public face that they're willing to make, whether it's Path to Persia or
Right.
causing Russia to extending Russia, those types of policy papers,
Mhm.
or how to fight multi-front war. I still believe, and I wonder if you still believe, that the U.S. is concerned with having to fight a multi-front war simultaneously. Do you believe that?
Well, I
Oh,
mean, yes. Wouldn't
because
they?
here's
I
the
mean, it
question I'll
seems like,
have
of
you.
course they are, right? But
Because here's the question I would have. If
you're
do,
saying
did
now it
they?
looks like they're trying to do that.
Well, all I'm asking,
Yeah.
does it? It looks to me like they've made it harder. Like they've not, by doing something. They made an assertive action here. It looks to me like they've made it harder now, not easier, to do this sequential strategic sequencing that they say they're doing. So that I want to. Do you agree with that? Like it looks harder to do now than it was just like less than a week ago.
Yeah, I mean, especially because uh, they haven't. Europe has not replaced them in Ukraine,
Right.
and now, I mean,
But
my
I think that
prediction is that Iran will soon be able to have a nuke, unless the containment is stronger than I think it is. But
And even bigger. Okay, go ahead, Eduardo. Sorry.
no, I just thought maybe you're right. But I thought maybe Trump's visit with the NATO summit was a way to push them into um, having them take care of Russia.
But the thing is here's what's happened: is the United States keeps finding itself having to go back and play the leader again.
Hmm.
NATO had called a meeting. NATO had called
Hmm.
a meeting discuss Ukraine. Iran happens. U.S. gets involved in it, and basically that meeting, that NATO meeting, was pushing all the Ukraine stuff off. Like they were canceling scheduled meetings that they had to deal with Ukraine stuff. Trump had to
Mm.
then go to NATO and get this thing started up again to say no, NATO is going to be doing this 5% spending. Although the Europeans are saying, yeah, we're going to increase our spending by 5% defense by 2035. Like the thing's unraveling. Like the U.S. is having now to go back to the NATO meeting to make sure that it's successful, that something comes out of it. That's not what was supposed to happen. Germany or somebody was supposed to step forward and be a new leader, and it's just not happening. And so now
Mhm.
U.S. leadership is necessary there. They have to keep their hands in that.
Yeah.
Then they have to keep their hands in Israel and Iran, and they had to pull forces out of the Pacific to deal with this thing over here. They're moving the wrong way. They're supposed to be moving shit over towards Asia to basically make it harder for to make China worry about being blockaded. And China is worried about being blockaded by a navy, but they got less to worry about now because U.S. has found its hands still stuck in all these other cookie jars. And
but
yeah,
yeah, I guess the question of, is China in a better position to invade Taiwan or not? That seemed to be like the key question that Wes Anderson was talking about.
yeah, but that's how they put it. Because China doesn't have to invade Taiwan. All China has to make sure is that U.S. cannot stop China from doing something in the region, and they don't have to do anything. They know time is on their side in terms of bringing Taiwan over. And if they see the U.S. weakening its position in the Pacific, they know their influence is growing, and that's what the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and their meeting about Iran and all this kind of stuff it indicates. So China has already claimed Taiwan as its own, as a part of Taiwan. That's not first move. Their moves are about building the Belt and Road Initiative, about challenging U.S. supremacy elsewhere in the globe, so that they can build their regional empire in the Pacific. And that's what's happening. And the U.S. is not able to like get over there and start to like do all the things it's trying to do in the Philippines, or whatever it has to do in Indonesia, or the Malacca Strait is this region that if Iran, if they get their oil from Iran, they go through the Persian Gulf, down into the Indian Ocean, through this strait that cut around in Indonesia. That little strip right there is supposedly where the U.S. is going to like sink anything that goes through. They're not in as good a position to do that any longer, and so it's not a question. I would say China's hand is strengthened because the U.S. is not able to do what it wants to do, which is get its fingers out of the problems it already has. And that's why I felt like they had to have some sort of success here. I thought the U.S. was going to get in aggressively militarily and build and build and build to get some sort of resolution that was going to work in the favor of Israel, because I don't think time is on their side. I think now with Iran, like Iran had before said, well, we don't need your defense systems, Russia. Well, now it looks like they're going to be rethinking that. And now they can rebuild that while they spend all this time talking about IAEA, and they don't even have to. It's not even about developing a nuclear weapon. There are people who are willing to let them borrow a nuclear weapon. They've already got those people lined up as well. It's they have the ally time to get their imperial. They're a proxy. They have time for their imperial masters, Russia and China, to strengthen them in the face of whatever's going on. And that's not the way it's supposed to be working for the United States. That's not good for them.
And it's not according to what we've just discussed in the sequencing.
In my, that's how I see it, at least. It's like, so that's why it's confusing for me. Unless like you're saying, Michael, they just fucked up.
Well, that's possible to me. I mean, the other thing that politically has to be addressed is the explanation coming from elements of the right, and actually this is the mainstream liberal explanation, is that Netanyahu was dragging the US into war, right? This is the basis on which Bernie Sanders opposed it, right? It's Netanyahu is dragging us into the war, right? And the thing you just laid out, Andy, could be explained that somehow Israel has forced the US's hand, right?
Yep.
And of course, I reject that explanation, because Israel doesn't get a single, it can't do anything without its US support. However, I do wonder if it has a different command structure. I mean, they do have their own separate command structure in Israel. And even, so to what extent the US and Israel are not aligned, I think it's should be well within. There's no way that Israel struck Iran without US permission. And in fact, we had evidence that Israel did consult with Trump, right? Perhaps some political considerations made them think that was a better idea than it was. Because Netanyahu does have incentives to go to war with Iran for his own, domestic political stuff. Like there are, it's about the, it's about in the long, in any sort of long term, the interests of Israel have to align with the interests of the United States, or it's over, right? So I don't know. I'm trying to like locate what I know for sure is true and where there's room for error. And what I know for sure is true is that the U.S. when the Pentagon writes papers about long-term strategy, Israel is referred to as a proxy. But I also know that there is some leeway for individuals to screw things up.
Right.
I feel like politically, the problem now is that you have a lot more people sort of buying into this. Israel is forcing us into this, and also Iran is a threat, and just one of the things I wanted to talk about or just say is that whenever there's a war development like this, you get to see how bankrupt and just ridiculous and what nonsense the day-to-day news cycle is.
Yeah.
Like Trump somehow, Trump said the F-bomb. Oh, he's so mad at Israel and Iran. He might have been mad that they screwed up. I mean, he may have really been mad, and that's why he said it. But like the domestic purpose of him saying, "Oh, they don't know what they're doing," is that he can separate himself from Israel somehow, and his base is happy again. I mean, it pleases his political base for him to separate himself from Israel.
Well, the
But
absurdity.
there's no material separation from Israel, right? We know
Yeah.
that that's not real, but people get caught up in all of the stuff, and we need to have we need to like build the organizational capacity of the people who don't get caught up in the kind of like the drama of the news cycle, because it's just such nonsense. Like, oh, suddenly it's the Iran nuclear program, but wait, oh no, we need to do a regime change, and oh yeah, they're a threat to us. Like we're back in the weapons of mass destruction conversation, but oh, actually, Trump wants a ceasefire.
Yeah.
As if this has something to do with, just has something to do with these people's personalities. To the extent that it has to be minor, but it could. That's what I'm saying.
I think it was an absurdity for on this podcast, What's Left, we are saying that every action that has been taken in the last 12 days or 14 days of this war were not just signed on to by the United States, but more likely than not directed by the United States. That, like you said, and let's find that clip again where A. Wes Mitchell is literally talking about Ukraine and Israel are proxies, and you will see that representation, as you said, in all the various documents of other groups, like that speak for the as mouthpieces for the U.S. ruling class. They all understand that Israel is a proxy of the United States. So it's an absurdity for a president to claim bringing peace. That same president is the one who started the war. So then they get to say, "Oh well, I stopped the war," but that's an absurdity. I do find it interesting. I mean, ultimately, to build an anti-war movement, I do believe an anti-war movement will have to be built on the basis of people who are looking to help defeat the U.S. empire and helping do so internally in the country. I don't necessarily think you have to get this stuff right in order to build an anti-war movement, because I can see how, looking at all these facts we've described, I can see how people could say, well, Israel is making, this is fucked up, and Israel drew us into a fucked up situation. Or people could say, this is 5D chess that Trump is playing to make it less likely that the U.S. can act as the empire. I don't believe either of those frameworks, but I cannot say that people who do could look at all these same facts that we're seeing and spin that into those stories.
Right.
If you ask me right now, having to re-examine what's happening, I would say my best guess is that the most aggressive actions that were taken, where the U.S. thought they were going to have decisive actions, happened in those first few days when Israel was just attacking military, like people in the military, political figures, nuclear scientists. Hearing the reports in the Wall Street Journal, how they were basically, that Israel was calling Israeli generals and saying, we want you to put up a video saying you denounce the Khomeini and blah, blah, blah. Because if you don't, we're blowing you and your family up. And then there are people who did that. Like, it looks to me like the big play here was not the B-2 bombers going after the nuclear facility because they knew that was going to happen. It looks to me like the big play where they thought they could make something decisive happen was that action right there, and it didn't do what they thought it could do, and they couldn't keep pulling that thing so the regime would be weakened enough to maybe collapse it or give themselves an opportunity. And I do believe that they were struck by the fact that their Iron Dome didn't work that well, and that all these cities, Haifa and what's the other one, the capital,
Tel Aviv.
Tel Aviv, were taking many blows, and so I do look at this potentially as the U.S. knew that the big moves were made 2 weeks ago, and that this move they made was actually a way to kind of like stop it. Like, we're gonna seal this thing off, like in the same way that the Iranians capped off their exhaust valves in their sites. They're like, we're sealing this conflict off for now, so that we can give ourselves time to regroup and come back later. So a lot of people are thinking the big move might have happened when the B-2 bombers are going. I'm kind of thinking that the big move happened weeks ago, and it just didn't play out the way the U.S. had hoped, and so they're just doing this to stop the event, rather than, which I kind of thought this wasn't the U.S. getting involved was going to be the beginning of an escalation, and it was not. It was them moving towards temporary ceasefire. Like, and let's remember, ceasefire has nothing to do with peace. So that's maybe how I'm looking at it now.
I think that makes sense, and I think I heard that similar take from someone else. I can't remember, but that the U.S. was basically stepping in to kind of take the heat actually off of Israel and make it seem like it was, now we did what we were saying we were going to do, which was about, the nuclear program, which obviously is just a pretext. But do you think that, I'm going to ask a question, but also I have to acknowledge that, all right, I said last week that I was like, man, they seem like they're getting away with it, right? It seemed like they had really hurt the Iranian regime. It did seem that way. And what happened since then, though, is that the retaliation from Iran was actually much greater than, it seemed much greater than folks had anticipated. And they had to suppress, they were openly suppressing all supports of any damage on Israel. And so it does make sense. So what you propose, I think, is a model that does kind of explain events, that the U.S. was like, okay, this didn't actually work. Now we're going to essentially make a final show of force that is a way to conclude it in a way that sort of saves some sort of political face, especially for the main tentacle, which is Israel. So my question is, do you feel like it was the damage done to Israel, that the Iran's military capacity to defend itself is probably maybe one of the main reasons why it didn't go the way that they said it was?
Yes.
Or that they had hoped, excuse me.
Right. I mean, I think the two things. One is that they weren't, because I'm not sure Israel had air superiority in the way that they claimed, because when I heard later, weeks in, 10 days in, they were still only firing, their planes were firing from Iraq into Iran. They weren't as flying over Iran as people would if you had air superiority. So that's number one. So yes, I believe they didn't do as much damage to Iran as they did, and I think the regime was not as weak as they thought it was. They were not able to pull the rug out from under it using the various methods they had. And the things I had heard about, like that Wall Street Journal thing about how they were like literally calling up generals and basically being like, do this now or we'll kill your family. Like, that's some dark shit right there. But it's not surprised me, but that's the kind of stuff they were trying to do. And they thought it would work, and it didn't. And then in addition, Israel was taking heat, and they're like, how do we end this? Because it doesn't look like we're making the regime collapse. So the U.S. had to come in and basically, it looks to me like, come away with an ending that allowed the U.S. to look strong. Jesse Helms had a famous quote that said, hey, you doing this now is going to undo all the weakness we had as a result of Afghanistan. And now everyone in the Middle East is going to understand we're the new sheriff in town. He was literally saying that, like saying that to Wall Street Journal.
Right.
That's the kind of thing they had, but I don't think it plays that way. And I think, again, the U.S. is trying to do things, and so far, I don't think it's worked. I get more and more nervous of like false flags again, when I see these kinds of things like this. But I think there was a combination of the regime didn't collapse. The regime was stronger than they expected. Israel was not able to do militarily and continue to like rumble over the entire place and then take out the leadership in the way that they had with Hezbollah. And yes, I think that last piece of how it looked really bad for Israel to be seen as being completely vulnerable to Iran through its missiles, and the idea of its invulnerability was being penetrated, and so they felt like this was not a good situation for them. So that's how I look at it as best I can make sense of it.
And you're saying that the leadership wasn't taken up because it's not that easy, or because, as the news say, that Trump prevented it?
No, I think the U.S. wanted the leadership out. I think the U.S. wants regime change.
All right.
They would welcome that. They wanted to do to Iran what they did to Syria recently. Michael's right, though. Like there was a lot of things that had to happen before that could take place. But I think they were trying to do it quick, and they thought they could, and it just didn't happen. And like, remember all the little lies that the United States had to put around it, like the negotiation stuff that was going on. Like some of those people who were negotiating were killed. Like that's that is like a setup thing. It is like a palace coup, but happening to an outside country. So it does speak to me of a kind of desperation that they needed to change the game somehow, and they thought they could get rich quick. And it didn't play out. So then they have to pull the plug, and now I think they're going to have to figure out how to come back again, because this is not over. The desire to do regime change as a result of getting it back at China or weakening China, things like that, by in no stretch is over. But they're going to have to work up to that again, because right now they're doing the whole negotiation thing, and Iran is, we're welcoming them back into that's how the U.S. is talking. Like, we're welcoming them back into the League of Nations because they don't have a nuclear weapon anymore, so we don't have to worry about that. Okay, then how do you plan on justifying your next attack? Because you have to attack again.
Well, we have to admit that just because the ceasefire is held for however many hours so far, it doesn't mean that they're not going to say, they can always change what they're saying. I mean, that's the part of the point. It's like, oh, actually, we destroyed their nuclear thing, but now China's helping them get nuclear weapons, and now we have to invade them again. I mean, there's a way in which, like,
yeah, that's true.
Nothing. Things don't have to make sense. I mean, and that's the political lesson. That's the political lesson that astounds me. It's like they can just make shit up whenever they need to, and people lap it up.
Yeah.
As long as it's aligned with these kind of with the kind of demonization narratives that have been going on for decades.
Yeah.
So I'm not convinced that the U.S. has definitely stopped, like the ceasefire is actually real. I wouldn't be surprised if Israel just, needed a few more shipments of more, missile defense systems, and then they're going to resume again. That could be true. And then, of course, they can make it look like, we have to defend Israel now.
Yeah.
I mean, there's ways they can still escalate within a period of time that would be before nukes. I don't know. I think it's important to say that.
Yeah.
I do want to share my screen and show two things from the policy papers that I really think people should start. Like, I think we should read them in detail. because there's a lot of interesting things in them. So the big one that Brian Berletic has been using to help us understand overall U.S. thinking is the Which Path to Persia, and I just want to highlight a few things in it. So one, the table of contents, which Brian Berletic has been showing and going through, is like they have gone through each of these options, and these are all. So what this represents is a collection of people who were essentially advising this paper was aimed at the Obama administration to advise them on Iran policy. And they talk a lot about how George Bush messed things up in this policy paper. So these are all things that have been thought out, but they also say that the options can be connected, right, and interleaved, and there's nothing that says we're going to do these things in order, right? But still, the third part of this thing. So the main options are, just if you look at how it's structured: dissuading Tehran, disarming Tehran, toppling Tehran. Right? These are not things that have not been thoroughly discussed. Right? And here in this policy paper, we have a collection of I would say a comprehensive collection of analysis that has guided that can guide that kind of thinking, right? I mean, they have like leave it to Bibi, allowing or encouraging an Israeli military strike, the Velvet Revolution, supporting a popular uprising, supporting Iranian minority and opposition groups, supporting a military move against the regime, and they end with this,
which is what I think that they were trying to do. Like chapter 8 looks like that's what they were hoping would happen. I think in the attack.
Right. And notice how they talk about containment, accepting the unacceptable, right? So the premise of this whole thing is that it is unacceptable for Tehran to ever get nukes because they won't cooperate with the United States. That's the fundamental premise. So just so if any, so for like people who have illusions about Trump playing 5D chess, there's no indication that there's nothing in here about that. And this has been the most reliable predictor this has been the most reliable way for us to understand US policy, right? And so if you want to so this came from the Brookings Institution. I want to go to the other major policy paper we've been talking about, which is I'm going to show the cover again. It's this one, excuse me. This is the Marathon Initiative is straight from inside the Pentagon. This is the Office of Net Assessment, the people the Pentagon pays to think far ahead, to think 20 years ahead, okay? And here's how they discuss Israel. So the whole point is to manage time wisely by using the proxy wars that are underway in Ukraine and Israel to increase our own capacity to wage war, so that a larger and more consequential war may yet be avoided due to our enhanced strength, right? And so, again, this is where you're like, it doesn't look like we're avoiding a more consequential war, right? And I agree with you, but I think there's still time for them to try and turn that around. If a sequencing strategy fails in its immediate aims, but nevertheless delivers a significant plus in the West's collective capabilities, it will still leave us better off than we would otherwise, right? So I wanted to read that because I think it's possible that they're still in this, they're trying to turn this into a significant plus, right? And I'm not sure that they won't be able to, is essentially
I don't see this. To me, it looks like they might have tried it, but it looks like they've once again not, like in the same way that they were trying to do that with Ukraine and Russia, and now they found Russia stronger, their proxy weaker, their allies in NATO less capable of doing things. I feel like once again they tried a new plan and they are weaker as a result of it, not stronger.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and this is not spin. I understand they want to spin things, but Wes Mitchell is not talking about spin and narrative. He's saying we are actually in real terms more in a more powerful position, and that did not work out that way. It did when they toppled Syria. Like Syria was an actual victory for the U.S. empire.
Yeah.
But
and I just want to, just so everybody knows, proxy wars. So, and partially there's so many people I want to just like rub this in their face. It's like, you morons. Like, why do you, like, basically, if you think, Netanyahu is dragging us in, or if you think the U.S. was defending Ukraine's right to self-determination, then the Pentagon does not think about it that way. The people who ultimately decide what happens with the bombs do not talk about it like, oh no, Netanyahu is, forcing us to do military things, or like, oh, the poor Ukrainians. Like, they think of this as tentacles of the U.S. overall military power. That's how they talk about it. So no, Trump is not playing 5D chess to end war.
right. Well, I will, but I do want to say that you're right. It was in 2009 they laid out some possible ways of just weakening Iran. I believe at this point they can't go for just the the weaker ones. At this point they need regime change because the National Defense Strategy has laid out that their main pacing competitor that they're facing starting 2018 when they put that document out, then again even re-upped in 2022 when they talked about China really is the problem and we got to get our nukes lined up, because in that document it doesn't just talk about China, it talked about redesigning and rebuilding its own nuclear deterrent, really nuclear first strike ability actually. This is something I've referred to before. Let's see, here we go. This was back in 2021. Iran and China 25-year cooperation, a $500 billion agreement that they were going to be working together militarily, economically, politically, in terms of surveillance and like their secret service. It's like it's the same relationship that China was going to have with Iran that the U.S. has had with Israel. This was in 2021. It was a big deal, and many people aren't talking about it. And just an interesting thing I found as I see the U.S. struggling to figure out how it's going to keep China in a box, because this is the reason regime change has to happen to Iran is they have to strike a blow against their main opponent, Russia, and really China. I looked at one of the older papers. Let's see. Hold on. Let me find it. Yes. This was a marathon initiative. China's Pursuit of Energy Security was written in September of 2024 by a different guy, Christopher Vassallo. And here's what he notes. China is making strides in its effort to secure its energy supply, undercutting the threat of an American blockade, potentially increasing Beijing's willingness for war. Basically saying Beijing is developing an electrical system, not for its military, but for its domestic use, that is independent of fossil fuels, making it harder. Here's the bottom one, that making China more resilient. China energy architecture, the more tenuous the logic of an allied far blockade on China as a means of weakening it. This is where I was talking about the Malacca.
It's removing a point of leverage that the U.S. currently has.
Right. So, U.S. is just scratching its head trying to figure out how it can punch a hole and make its opponents feel like they're getting on their back foot. And time again, I do feel that it's the U.S. Each action it's taken is finding itself in a worse situation. And that's not a good thing. I mean, I understand the multipolar world people think this is a good thing. It's not a good thing unless you can make a revolution here in this country, because if the U.S. regime can stay in power, once Trump is out, they'll have a new person in power to say, this is how we're going to do it. And either with Trump or somebody else, there's all sorts of crazy false flags they can do to like try to, change the game again.
I think I'm just witnessing what it's like for Western-led global order being dismantled by one side, and you have it trying to maintain itself through these alliances that I think are not. I thought that from reading sequencing that they would be doing it strategically as we have been reading, but I guess I'm just more confused and it's getting more fucked up in my head about how everything's going to go about. So it's like you never know what's next. I thought we have a map of what was going to happen strategically, and so it's like emotions run up high and then low, up high and then low. So that's my feeling and my sentiment from this discussion. I appreciate you two taking the lead on it.
And
yeah, I think the thing that's also apparent when you read these is that they, and I'll say again, they talk about how it gets messed up. Like, it is very easy to lay out a clean strategy in a policy paper, right? And it is actually much more difficult for them to execute it. And one of the things they actually say, I mean, the reason why he wrote strategic sequencing revisited, because he's like, we're messing it up. We didn't do this right. He basically was like, we need to settle things with Ukraine before we start, like as soon as possible. It's also implied that what he meant was like just way more arms spending, and to get, he basically was like, yeah, they're trying to do strategic sequencing. That thinking explains a lot of the things that they've been doing, but it also was clear that they're behind in that the strength of Russia and China is much, is beyond, perhaps beyond what the U.S. can manage with this kind of strategy. But I don't think they have some other thing. What they do is they have to reassess the situation every time, and they use this thinking to guide their next decision. It doesn't mean that they're gonna do exactly the plan laid out in the policy paper. So there is a dynamism to it. And
I think I'll just end on the fact that
also
remember that A. West Mitchell's strategy for multi-front empire building was looking at all empires that had themselves collapsed. So
right.
I will say it is not possible to do what the United States is trying to do. And so, but we have to say that if you let the empire collapse of its own, I think we end a nuclear war. And the way we must do it to avoid that is revolution.
One of the things I wanted to raise was that one of the great things about folks like Brian Berletic, and there's been some other analyst people I've been introduced to, is that they do acknowledge that a lot of this thinking is driven by the fact that corporations run our system, right? But there's not a clear connection. And it's funny, Brian Berletic is always like, I've been warning people over and over again, and I'm like, yeah, dude, you have to have an organization that's actually able to take the system down. So the thing that we have to do becomes even more clear is to connect the ideas with people's actual activity so that we can have a kind of broad-based actual dismantling of the way that things run. And that means like the demand for like meet everyone's basic needs and stop fucking bombing people. Like we don't need the US to be supreme, right? And internationally, right, we see the material potential for a movement like that, but I don't see I don't see it forming in actuality, right? And so I'm not hopeful that we're going to see the empire collapse with a revolution. I'm not.
Yeah, neither.
Everybody just lined up, they all lined up with this, like, this bullshit that Iran is somehow,
Yeah.
A threat, which is actually laid out in that policy paper. Like, the people in the US have to think Iran is a very big threat in order for them to be willing to do what is required. And that part they still have.
Oh, I think that's it, and which explains why China has been the lifeline for Russia in their allyship. All right. Well, then here we go. That does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast / channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes wherever you found this episode, or on our blog on whatsleft.podcast.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast / channel there and connect with us. I remind folks, if you like anything you have heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our platforms on the Spotify, iTunes, Podcast, BitChute, Odyssey, YouTube, Rumble, or Telegram. And you can find our blog and any of those links in the episode notes wherever you found this episode. If you would like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, such as someone has recently, and we'll hopefully do that next week, contact us through our blog, and Andy will respond. Thank you. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-host Michael Hoffman and Andy Lipson. Thank you all for listening. Ciao, ciao.
Bye-bye.